Okay, music's playing. Hello.
Hi. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
How you been?
Good.
Haven't seen you since August.
Long time no see.
I know. Just kidding, we're married. Hi, we're back.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yay.
It's been a long time. We're very excited to be back and be making more episodes. We needed a minute to sort of regroup. We moved, as you may be able to tell. We're in a different location. Holidays, birthdays, etc., yada yada. But we didn't want to stop making the podcast, so here we are. Since we've improved our video setup, we're now going to start uploading on YouTube too. So make sure you subscribe. Look us up on YouTube. Are you excited about coming back to the podcast?
Yes.
Yeah?
Very excited.
Good. I'm excited to be here with you and to do this again. And hopefully we can keep it going. So we're ready. We have our matcha. Cheers. Cheers. And let's get into it. I think, Joe, you're going first.
I am going first.
So what are you talking to me about today?
So today I'm going to tell you about the EZLN. Ejército, Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. Let me first take it back to the Mexican Revolution. So this is from 1910 to 1920. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about the Mexican Revolution. I think
that would be a separate episode.
That would be a different episode.
And one that you should do.
Yeah.
Probably. It might take more than one episode.
Yeah, there's a lot.
It's pretty loaded, I guess.
Right. So Emiliano Zapata was a soldier and commander in the Mexican Revolution. He was famous for fighting for the rights of indigenous people. He joined the revolution with one of the goals being to support the land rights of indigenous people, especially from the area that he was from, but in Mexico in general. So a significant outcome of the Mexican Revolution was Article 27, which had major land reforms. It established ejidos, which is land allotment for communities and villages. So basically the government was required to give land to communities and to people so that they can use it for farming. But it wasn't, considered owned by the people.
That's interesting. In Mexicali, where I grew up, there's ejidos like in the outskirts of the city, basically. And I feel like I heard the word a lot, but I didn't really know what it meant. I just knew it meant like communities and land that are like far away from everything else, but I didn't know any background on it.
One thing that also came out of the revolution was a political party called PRI. So you are much more knowledgeable about this than I am, just because you've had direct experience. But
yeah, I mean, I do and I don't. Like the time that I lived in Mexico was before I could vote or conceptualize anything to do with politics. So like I've definitely heard of PRI and like I've seen whatever. There's a big building in Mexicali that I can like picture clearly in my mind, and commercials and campaigns and things, but like I don't know a lot. The only thing I know is that it's the political party that my dad does not like. So that's it.
Right.
And I recognize that doesn't make me a great like Mexican person because I'm not super educated in the Mexican like government and political system, but also like I moved to the US when I was like just starting to get a grasp on things like that. So I mean, I barely have a grasp on the American political system, so much less the Mexican one.
Well, I have a couple of fun facts about PRI. So I haven't said their name yet, but the English translation is Institutional Revolution Party. So they've named themselves after the revolution. But here's a couple of other fun facts. So from 1929 to 1982, they won every single presidential election in Mexico by well over 70%. They eventually, like in the process of winning all of those elections, they ended up establishing something called one-party dominance, so that it was literally only in power over like everything.
This was what time period?
Well, so I said they won every election from 1929 to 1982.
Okay. I guess that tracks. Because I was going to say I remember there being presidents of other political parties in my lifetime, like when I was there, but this was before.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Yeah. Another fun fact about interaction of pre with presidential elections, the 1988 election, but somebody ran against the incumbent president, and then several decades later, that incumbent president who had won admitted that he knew that the other person, like for a fact, was going to win, like easily, and so they rigged it. So he had openly admitted, yeah, we rigged it. 1988 election.
I mean, that is not good.
Yeah.
But I wish some other presidents in some other countries
Yeah.
would also cop to that. Interesting. I feel like I must have heard about this at some point. Do you know the name of the guy?
The 1988 election was won by Carlos Salinas de Gortari. Miguel de la Madrid was Mexico's president at the time during the 1988 election. He's the one who admitted in 2004 that him and the other guy rigged the election.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
How many years later?
So the election was 88, and he admitted in 2004.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's just sort of to set up sort of the political environment that Mexico is in for this time period. So then in the 1970s, a group is formed called FLN. So it stands for National Liberation Forces. This is formed by a college professor. He forms it in Chiapas, Mexico. So this was a left-wing sort of radical group, and they buy a ranch. And in 1974, the Mexican army actually invaded their ranch, and they had a big fight, and a few people died on both sides. And after that, they basically disbanded. They sort of dissolved. So this group was Marxist-Leninist. One of the sort of defining features of Leninism is vanguardism. The idea behind vanguardism is that a revolution should be carried out essentially by a small group, well-educated, very active members of society taking control of the major levers of their city or country or whatever it is. It is the vanguard that is causing the revolution is pushing the revolution forward. In the 80s, some of the members of the FLN started coming back together and talking to people in Chiapas, talking to people who live there, members of the community, and they started forming a new group, and this ends up being EZLN. And so one of the major sort of ideological shifts that has to happen is that the like Marxist-Leninist perspective it doesn't go over very well with these people. And they're like indigenous, like Mayans, who live there in Chiapas. And it doesn't mesh well with like their culture. And so there's sort of a conversation that happens and develops over time. And so they land on a more anarchist form of leftism. It's complicated to describe because they themselves even say they don't subscribe to all of the words that people give to them, but people say like libertarian socialist. Besides the left-wing former FLN members coming in and agitating and organizing with locals, there was also a lot of influence on the development of this group from the local churches. So the Catholic Church was one of the centers of organization for these communities. Yeah, so there's a lot of influence on the underlying philosophy of this group from something called liberation theology, which is, it comes out of Christianity in general, Catholicism in particular, and it's basically taking the teachings of the Bible and Jesus and all that, but coming to conclusions about, supporting the rights of poor people and indigenous people of different parts of the world and oppressed people, kind of the things that you would really hope most Christians do take out of those their teachings. So the church would organize like conferences and meetings for indigenous people to talk about what they need in their community and what they should do in general. So organizing. So there's also interesting influence from Mayan indigenous cosmology and philosophy on the principles of the Zapatistas. So for instance, one thing that comes directly from Mayan culture is something called, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but amtel, which means work that is democratically determined, assigned, administered, and carried out. So some people have said that this practice of amtel is the heart of Zapatismo and leads to this maxim of command by obeying. So this is a thing that Zapatistas refer to, is command by obeying. Another Zapatista practice that comes from the indigenous philosophy is called preguntando caminamos, so asking as we walk. So essentially engaging in very deep conversations while taking walks together. Another one is called Ichbail Tamuk, which it can be translated as to bring one another to largeness or greatness. And it says that it implies the coming together of a big collective heart. So sometimes people translate this as democracy, but other people say that that oversimplifies what is really trying to be conveyed there. And it leads to autonomous democratic governance and a democracy of mutual respect in the culture of Zapatista. So these are the sort of things that are the starting point that the people came with before even the Marxists or, the Catholics added on to these things. And so lastly, the last time I'll embarrass myself with words from a language I don't know, the Ichbail Tamuk promotes Lekil Kuhlehal, which can be translated as the life that is good for everyone. A more simple translation is like autonomy or a dignified life. So all of these things are really interesting because, and I wanted to include them specifically because, people talk about Native Americans and, pre-Columbian Mexicans as, they attribute different things to these groups, but especially Native Americans, they attribute this like, they were so peaceful and simple before Europeans came to them. There is a truth behind it that like got like very sort of deeply disturbed by the perspective of the Europeans that brings people to say this sort of thing. And this is the sort of example, as I see it, of this like different sort of philosophy and culture built in to these types of groups of people before Europeans came and interacted with them. And it's interesting how those philosophies are sort of naturally aligned with sort of left-wing anarchist philosophy.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think that, I mean, just like you said, there's so much, especially in the way that the United States presents, like indigenous people. And I mean, when you're learning history in school, like, it's never put within the context of like, these were already people that had their own thing going, like their own communities, their own civilization. It's more like painted as if, the Europeans came and were like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? Like, you don't know what you're doing, or you're dumb, or you're like whatever. And we're here to teach you all the good things, like.
Literally because, like, for instance, their farming practices
Mm-hmm.
were different. And Europeans automatically assumed, well, then they must kind of suck, right? And it's like, no, actually,
They're better.
they're better. Yeah.
Yeah.
In very many cases,
Yeah.
Native Americans, Native South Americans as well, like, had very advanced farming practices, agricultural practices that Europeans saw and could not comprehend and therefore assumed was worse.
It's also crazy how, like, I'm sure I don't have any, like, I guess, examples to give, but even though they were so, like, the Europeans came in and, the way that history is presented is that Europeans came and fixed everything and saved everyone. I'm sure at the same time they also took so much from indigenous people, in the sense that, like, they learned so much from them and, like, cherry picked some of the things that they thought, like, maybe they are doing better than us, but, like, I'm going to take it and make it my own thing, and now it's like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? And I feel like that is something that is it's still happening now, like, it's still a thing now. And it just all goes back to Europeans being in places that they had no business being in, and claiming them as their own when they weren't supposed to. Do you hear what I'm saying? I feel like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but
you should read The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber.
Is it about that?
Yeah. It's like
Okay.
1,000% about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've talked about doing a David Graeber episode, so
Right.
maybe I don't have to read it.
Okay, so I've talked about the 70s. FLN started and fell apart. I've talked about the 80s. EZLN comes out of the ashes of that and sort of aligns itself better with the indigenous people that live in Chiapas in particular. So we see the development of this philosophy of Zapatismo arising from this interaction of the native Mayan philosophies with the Catholic Church and this liberation theology perspective, along with Marxism and, bending towards left-wing anarchism. So now in the 90s, a couple of things happen that significantly impact these people. So in 1992, the Mexican government amends Article 27. So the one I was telling you about earlier, that is giving land to villages and to people in order to farm. This was one of the major things that the Mexican Revolution was fought over, because the Mexican government was taking a bunch of land from people. So in 1992, the Mexican government amends Article 27 so that they do not have to do the Ejército land distributions anymore. So there were actually a lot of new distributions that were pending at this time, and they just amend that article of the Constitution and say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. Then in 1993, NAFTA was approved by the Mexican Senate in November and set to go into effect in 1994. So one of the major things about NAFTA, so this is the North American Free Trade Agreement, is that it opened up a lot of trade in North America, so like between Mexico and the U.S. in particular, and like a very direct consequence of the way that it was opened up is that U.S. corn, which is at this time heavily, and I mean still today, heavily subsidized by the U.S. government can now be sold in Mexico. And what does that mean? They can charge nothing. They can charge dirt cheap for this American corn in Mexico. And that means that all the Mexican farmers who are not subsidized by the Mexican government cannot come anywhere near to competing. And this has like drastic consequences on the agricultural market and just on the entire population. And it pushes a lot of people either to move from more rural areas into cities or to immigrate to the United States. And so it's a huge factor in Mexican immigration, and it majorly hurt the economy for Mexicans. So NAFTA is set to come into effect on January 1st of 1994. And so what also happens in January 1st of 1994 is that EZLN issues their first declaration and revolutionary laws. So the declaration amounts to a declaration of war on the Mexican government, which they considered illegitimate because of what they were doing to the Mexican people. They specifically say that they're opting for armed struggle against the Mexican government due to a lack of results that had been achieved from peaceful protests, such as sit-ins and marches. So people had been protesting all over Mexico. Lots of different stuff was going on. Nothing happened, right? NAFTA was still going into effect. Nothing changed. So they said, okay, fine. We're going military with this. So besides making a declaration, an estimated 3,000 armed Zapatista insurgents seized 6 towns and cities in Chiapas. So they took over these towns. They had guns, and they just took over these towns and said, this is ours now. So they also issued a list of demands to the Mexican government. So it was a list of long-standing grievances for the indigenous communities of Chiapas, but also for the rest of Mexican society as well. And it had to do with things about work, land, housing, food, healthcare, education, independence, liberty, democracy, justice, and peace. So following a ceasefire on January 12th, peace talks commenced later in the month between a Catholic bishop named Samuel Ruiz. So he was acting as a representative for the Zapatistas, and the former mayor of Mexico City, Manuel Camacho Solis. In response to the siege of EZLN, Esteban Moctezuma, who was the interior minister, submitted his resignation to President Zedillo, and President Zedillo refused to accept his resignation. Because of this, though, President Zedillo abandoned taking a military offensive approach to EZLN, to stopping them, and instead just sort of, let them be. So he didn't accept his resignation, and instead, took that resignation, which is a form of protest. He was saying, I'm in your cabinet, and I'm saying I'm quitting over this issue. And he said, no, fine, stay. I'm gonna let them be. Right? So the protest worked. Technically speaking, on paper, EZLN has been at war with the Mexican government since 1994. But really it's been sort of a completely cold war for a very long time. But mostly it's not been very direct conflict. There was something funny that happened where Vicente Fox said, I think in 2000, that he would get EZLN to surrender in 15 minutes. Something like that. He'll get on the phone with them 15 minutes and it'll all be over. And not even close. It didn't work at all. And they actually sent a bunch of Zapatistas into Mexico City and had this campaign of spreading information and also like giving people help. So it was a big failure. So it's really interesting the way that the Zapatistas interact with sort of new philosophy. Not everything is completely indigenous philosophy, or it's not completely just classic Marxist philosophy. They also seek to, improve different points over time. So Zapatista women are invested in a collective struggle of neo-Zapatismo and of women in general. And so Ana Maria, one of the movement leaders, has said, the women's struggle is the struggle of everybody, and that the Zapatistas fight not for their own interest, but against all injustices and exploitation for all Mexicans. So in the months following the Zapatista uprising, they held several women's conventions in Chiapas and surrounding areas, including hundreds of women from various states in Mexico. They also have something called the Women's Revolutionary Law. Women have the right to participate in the revolutionary struggle and peace at the level of their capacity and will dictates without any discrimination based on race, creed, color, or political affiliation. Women have the right to work and to receive a salary. Women have the right to decide on the number of children that they have and take care of. Women have the right to participate in community affairs and hold leadership positions if they're freely and democratically elected. Women have the right to primary care in terms of their health and nutrition. Women have the right to education. Women have the right to choose who they are with, like their romantic partners, and should not be obligated to marry by force. No women should be beaten or physically mistreated by either family members or strangers. And women have all the rights and obligations set out in the revolutionary laws and regulations. So this is the women's revolutionary law on top of the ordinary revolutionary law. And so they set this in particular, and it's interesting that some of these laws that I said, they specifically are overriding particular Mayan traditional beliefs. And so about like forcing women to marry and forcing them to have children and these kinds of things. So that was in the thing I was reading, that was specifically listed as like a thing that they overwrote. And so the last thing I want to tell you about is sort of the leadership in EZLN. So there is a guy who is in some sense the face of EZLN, and it's ironic to call him the face because he always wears a mask. So it's like a balaclava. He, as far as I know, there aren't pictures of him with his face, and they do this in particular because they like very specifically do not want to have like sort of an aesthetic, like a hero figure being propped up, sort of like Che Guevara, even though they do explicitly like Che Guevara and like take a lot of his stuff and incorporate it into their philosophy. They don't want to have just like a face figure. And this guy is named Subcomandante Marcos, and the Subcomandante title is really important because he is not the commander of it. He is a sub-commander, and he actually serves under a like committee of primarily indigenous folks who are the leadership of the group, and it's a committee, and then he just acts sort of as the face or in some way a leader. Yeah. So that's everything I gathered about EZLN. I've always been curious about them. I mean, especially like the lead singer of Rage Against the Machine has worn like shirts that say EZLN, or I've known about them for many years as just like an example of, I don't know if you want to call it successful, but like in some ways successful anarchist, action movement.
Yeah, that was super interesting. I also have just heard about EZLN kind of like in the same way, but I didn't really know much about them. So yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
So I'm excited to hear about your topic today.
I'm very excited to talk about my topic today because it's definitely something that has been all over my brain lately. Today I'm going to be talking about Hobonichi.
I am excited for this too because we are both big stationery nerds.
Yes, we are. And I wanted to do this because I'm officially a Hobonichi girl. Here it is. I got it for Christmas. It's amazing. But also because like you said, we're both into like stationery, and I thought it would be as interesting to you as it is to me. So, yeah. Before I get into like Hobonichi specifically, I wanted to talk about Japanese like stationery and sort of like the culture around paper, etc. in Japan. Japanese culture has been perfecting, paper and writing instruments for a really long time, since, for over 13 centuries, basically. Obviously, Japan has roots in calligraphy. Their handwriting script is so distinct, especially compared to Western languages. It's just so different, and it's so like artistic. Japan actually received paper making technology from China around the 7th century, which was roughly 6 centuries before it reached Europe through the Silk Road. So they were like ahead of the game, and that's sort of also why it became like they became the best at it from the get-go. And then calligraphy came around the Heian period, and it made handwriting an art form. It wasn't just about communication, it was also about how do we make this pretty. Brushes were made from animal hair, and they were, essential writing instruments. Because Japanese characters require a lot of attention, that also made it so that the Japanese people cared more about the tools that they were writing with, like brushes and paper and the quality of paper, etc. When paper came to Japan, it wasn't necessarily accessible to everyone, like it was accessible to rich people. But during the Edo period, it became democratic. Like everybody had access to paper, and common people also were able to access it, and they enjoyed karuta, playing cards, and ukiyo-e paintings. I should have started out by saying that I'm going to mispronounce something, so I apologize for that. Yeah, so they also had access to something called karawaban broadsheets, which were a precursor to newspapers. So jumping forward in time, in 1952, something called the Midori Business Planner was introduced. That brought with it the beginnings of the Techo culture. So Techo is actually just the word for planner or like a pocketbook in Japanese, but it sort of became a cultural movement. It became about more than just writing your thoughts down or trying to stay organized, and more of a way for people to express themselves creatively. It became artistic, kind of like Japanese writing. People started to incorporate drawings, just all kinds of art and artsy things into their journals or their planners, making it pretty, using colored inks and markers, etc. Like they basically turned, using a planner, which is such a like regular normal thing, into like using a planner for self-expression, for pizzazz, to make your life, when written down on paper, look exciting, as it should be. So that's sort of Techo culture. So Hobonichi is called Hobonichi Techo, like the one I have here, and there are other ones too. Are like, this is a Hobonichi Techo weeks, and there's a few others that I'll talk about later. But that's sort of the background and sort of why like Japanese stationery is like the peak of stationery. Like when you think about good quality stuff, that's sort of where it comes from. It comes from like a background of caring about your tools when it comes to writing, because writing isn't just whatever. Writing is intentional and artistic. So that has sort of carried, over throughout the culture and is still important to them today. So I got a lot of my research from today from this website called JetPens. So shout out to JetPens, because they had a lot of information, and they also have a really cool YouTube channel, which I did subscribe to. That's all about Japanese stationery. So I read an interview from JetPens with Miss Ayako Koizumi. She is a project manager for Hobonichi, and she oversees product development. and event coordination. And as of 2023, when this article was published, she had been with Hobonichi for over 25 years. So Hobonichi actually started as a lifestyle website. They were kind of a blog like that shared, it was free content about pop culture, interviews, columns, and it was run by a copywriter who is now the CEO of Hobonichi. His name is Shigesato Itoi. As a fun fact, Shigesato is also one of the creators of the video game series called Mother. And I guess in English it's called Earthbound. I'd never heard of it, but like when I saw like the pictures and the art from it, it definitely looked familiar. So he also has a background in like video game design and stuff, which I feel like sort of comes through when you take a look at, Hobonichi. If you go on the website, the cute animations are like video game reminiscent. So like when I learned that, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So the initial concept of the Hobonichi planner came from wanting to create a product for the website team to use, like internally, something that they could, keep their notes in, that they could keep just information about their workflow, and just trying to find a way to make their workday more exciting. So they developed the first Hobonichi planner for that reason. And then they sort of pitched it to their audience on the Hobonichi website, and they had an overwhelming positive response because the website was popular at that point. They had some like loyal followers, and so they sort of threw it out there and people were very responsive. And so the Hobonichi, the very first Hobonichi Techo made its debut in 2001. So Hobonichi got a really positive response from their website audience, but they also wanted to make sure that what they were making was something original and not like anything else that was already on the market. There were already so many other brands. Like I mentioned Midori earlier, like they're also a huge stationery brand. There were already so many other brands that were making Techo planners that were so good that they knew that if they were going to release something, it had to be different. Like the Techo planner market was already good. I would imagine they're within the community of people who are into stationery and planners, etc. I'm sure they had like brand loyalty, and if there are already these like big brands that have recognition, that have quality that people know, making really good planners, and they were probably like, okay, well, we can't do what they're doing because we won't compare, They wanted their Techo to be easy to use and high quality, and that's why they decided to go with this type of paper called the Tomo River paper. So Tomo paper is a premium Japanese-made, exceptionally thin and smooth paper renowned for its ability to handle fountain pen ink, markers, and calligraphy without bleeding or feathering.
So does this notebook right here have that?
So it doesn't have the original kind of Tomo paper that they used at the beginning, but because that has been, I guess, discontinued. But there is a new version of it called like the Tomo River, and I think it's like the Tomo River Paper S or like the Tomo S, and it's different. I think probably the process they use to make it is different, but it's still very good quality. So
can I see?
So that's actually one of the first things that I noticed when I started to write in my Hobonichi Techo. It like handles the ink so well. It doesn't bleed. I think maybe if you were to use like a permanent marker, sure it would bleed, but I use just regular fountain pens, and not only do they not bleed, they also look darker. Like when I the other day I tested it out because I thought I was tripping, and I wrote in the Hobonichi and I wrote on a separate piece of paper, and it made my pen better. Like it made the quality of the pen a lot richer, a lot darker. So I mean, I can definitely see that it does make a difference. I think that's the kind of thing that maybe as like, and this is like, I'm a stationery lover, so I sometimes I pay attention to those things, sometimes I don't, but it's such a small detail. But they're that's how they're doing it over there, you know, like they got it like that. They know what they're doing when it comes to paper, and you can tell it was crazy for me to like, you know, write in it and then write on another piece of paper with the same pen. So it's not even that the pen was a better quality or anything. It was just that paper makes such a big difference. And I feel like I knew it abstractly. I had never witnessed it so clearly, you know?
That's really cool.
Yeah. So kind of like I mentioned earlier, the CEO's background, Itoi, his last name is Itoi, in the video game industry really influenced the product too. He wanted to make something that his peers would enjoy using, that people would have a good time using. Like it wasn't just like any other notebook that you could write your thoughts in.
He wants to make a quality product.
Exactly. So there are a few different kinds of Hobonichi Techos. There's actually kind of a lot, more than I realized, but I just listed out some of the more popular ones. The original one is it's an A6 notebook. It's a daily 1 page per day planner, and it is like a little bit bigger than this. So it's got a different layout. And then there's the cousin, which is also, it's actually, I think, bigger than the original. And that also has, it's a daily planner, and it also has vertical weekly spreads. It's less like portable than this, but it's still good. I've seen a lot of people use it online, and it looks nice. And I'm also somebody who tends to write a little bigger. So I'm actually thinking it might be better for me, but this is my first like Hobonichi Techo ever. So that one's really nice. And then there's the Weeks, which is the slim design, which is this one. Well, technically this is the Weeks Mega. So the Weeks Mega is exactly like the Weeks, except it has more blank pages at the end. And yeah, so this is more meant to be like throw in your bag every day. The layout is you get monthly spreads, and then you get weekly spreads as well that you can, you know, write stuff in. And the right side of it is just a blank grid page, and the left of it is, you know, every day of that particular week. So you're meant to fill it in however you want. There's no right or wrong way to use the Techo. You kind of can be as creative or as plain as you want to be, which I think is like the appeal of it. So one of the features of the Hobonichi Techos is the inclusion of weekly quotes. And these have been part of the planner since the very, very first one. The quotes are sort of on the bottom of the weekly spreads. There's a quote right here. And those are actually picked every year for every new Techo that is coming out. The Hobonichi team gathers all the articles that are published on the website, and they grab their favorite quotes. And then the whole selection process takes about like 1 to 2 months for them to decide what they're going to include. So they have to like narrow it down to whatever fits in the notebook. Another kind of component that is appealing to people when it comes to the Hobonichi are the covers. The Hobonichi team meets to share creative ideas to come up with what the covers are going to be for the year. They also talk about if there are any artists that they would like to collaborate with. They've done some collaborations in the past too. Some of the artists that they've collaborated with include Yumi Kitagishi, Junji Ito, Iyo Okumi. They did like a One Piece like anime collaboration, and Tamagotchi. So I also wanted to talk about just like the rise of popularity of Hobonichi and sort of the social media community that has sort of been created around it. So the Hobonichi Techo experienced a massive surge in global popularity, with 2024 sales surpassing 900,000 units, which was a 30% year-over-year increase. So it had a huge boom in popularity. Like I said earlier, like from the beginning, even before the first one was created, they had always had an audience. But it seems like, you know, in the past 2-3 years, there's just been like, that's all anybody, especially in like people who are into planners and stationery, everybody knows and talks about the Hobonichi Week specifically, it seems like, but also just Hobonichi Techos in general. like I said earlier, there's a whole, I feel like, community online surrounding the Techo. About 2-3 years ago, some content creators named Lindsay Scribbles and the Coffee Monsters Co. started posting videos on YouTube that would feature them doing sort of a detailed overview of how they use their Techos. And since then, there have been many other creators that do the same thing on Instagram and TikTok. These creators have created a community around like Hobonichi, of fellow Hobonichi lovers that get inspiration from each other, like share tips, and just overall love to like gush of their love of the planner. And this is something that has, as I mentioned earlier, come across my desk many a times when I'm scrolling on TikTok. When I was on TikTok, I'm not on TikTok anymore, but on Reels for sure. Like there's just so much content around the Hobonichi Techos. The girlies love it, and I love to see it because, like, I do think there's something. I mean, there's something to any kind of like any hobby like this. There are two sides of the coin. We talked before about, Labubu and the Labubu craze and the community aspect of it, the coming together aspect of it, which was the positive. The negative is also, of course, the consumerism and the overconsumption in general of stuff to have a hobby, to feel like you belong, to feel like et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like even though a planner is a much more practical thing to spend money on than a Labubu, which she's back there. I don't know if you can see her, but it's still like it can be a lot, And this is not what the episode is about, but another example of that is coloring. Like coloring became a huge thing on TikTok. Have I dabbled? Yeah, but people were buying like 10, 20 coloring books, like big buckets of markers. Like it became such a thing. I think it went from being something that brought people together to being something that was like, well, if you're not doing it with the 500 markers and this technique and that technique, then what are you even doing, And I will say, to me, that's a little different than the Hobonichi community. I've only seen really nice things, like people sharing their spreads. I constantly go on Instagram, on Pinterest for inspiration because I like the planner for the practical side of things, but I also do want to get artsy with it because that's just the kind of person I am. So I love to see other people's ideas, and I love how much it has become a part of the conversation when it comes to stationery. I think it's really fun. So just to sort of like round out my argument, I really like my Hobonichi Techo. I think it's a really simple but creative way to keep track of your life. I think that all of us, and I know I certainly have, become really accustomed to the convenience of a phone, of a computer, of like, all of our devices, which are still important and like, hold a lot of information for us and are very practical. But it's not the same when you're tracking something on paper as when you're simply adding it to your calendar, etc. It feels more real, and it feels more to me like record keeping, like stuff that I will look back on, when I'm older. Are there many other ways to track your life on paper that don't require a fancy notebook? Yeah, like you could do it with whatever you want. As I mentioned, as a stationery lover, somebody who is like honestly becoming more and more of a snob, I feel like this particular planner has done that for me. Sometimes it's good to buy things that are high quality, and that just is what it is. It's up to you if you have the money or want to spend the money on it, but I'm very happy with it. I've also, shout out to our friend Jen, I also told her about it. We talked about it, and she was also like very into the idea, and so now it's also become something for her and I to bond over. And yeah, and we've been enjoying sharing things with each other. We're gonna get together, we're gonna do like a FaceTime at the end of the month where we're gonna do like planner and junk journaling together. So yeah, I think it's just fun. It's a fun hobby. It's up to you how far into it you want to get. And yeah, so that's it. That's all about Hobonichi.
That was great. That was really interesting.
Thank you. Okay, that is going to be it for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you are happy that we're back. We're very happy that we're back. Make sure you are following us on Instagram. We're at brainworms_pod. We are on YouTube now. Look us up on YouTube, Brainworms Podcast. And also we're on Spotify. We're on a bunch of other podcasting platforms. And if you want to check us out, yeah, just do that, please. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.